Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Radio, Sino Land, Shenzhen, just south of the Tropic of Cancer. For friends, fans, and followers out there who have watched me or me before, at least on YouTube, you can't see it on SoundCloud or Stitcher Radio, etc. But if you look behind me, there's nothing left. And so we're almost about ready to give the keys back to this place, and we're moving across the street to our new apartment. My goal is the next podcast will be done over there next week, and it's Saturday here, the 14th, Bastille Day, La Fête de Bastille in France, the National Day for France. And of course, tomorrow night, France is going against Croatia in the World Cup, which my wife and I will not miss, over our dead bodies. And so anyway, it's a bit echoey in here because all there is this desk and my computer. As soon as my other desk arrives at the other place on Monday, gets put together, it's a cheapo IKEA thing, and gets assembled. By Tuesday, I will be able to do, from now on, podcasts at the new apartment. So bear with the echoiness and the very bland atmosphere behind me. You don't want to miss this one. It's a wonderful, wonderful installment. As usual, if you are not at SoundCloud or YouTube where you can see the original link, go to chinarising.puntopress, puntopress.com. Click on the blog tab, go down about 4 or 5 articles, and you'll see this one here. And because there's a couple of great photos, some images, and of course there's always some useful hyperlinks. This podcast article is called Mao's Legacy Defended and Famous Swim Decoded for Clueless Academics. Part 4 of 8 of Raman Mazaheri's New China Scholarship. This is cross-linked with the Greenville Post, which is the best anti-imperial website bar none. Sign up for the free newsletter. And it's also cross-linked with the Saker, which provides the best coverage of all things Russia bar none. Add it to your favorites. In fact, Raman's original series was the series was originally posted on the Saker. Love the Saker and his wonderful website, as I do the Greenville Post. Of course, there's a downloadable SoundCloud podcast at the bottom of the page, and it's syndicated all over the place. There's the big photo. The lead photo shows a picture released by the Chinese official news agency, shows some 5,000 Chinese following Chairman Mao Zedong's example, swimming on the 16th of July 1966 in the Yangtze River near Wuhan, displaying floating portraits of the great helmsman and slogans calling for him to live a 10,000-year life. This is the 4th installment of Raman Mazaheri's amazingly informative 8-part series called New China Scholarship. To borrow a baseball term, Raman really hit the ball out of the park in this one with brilliant cross-cultural and timeline analysis of world events. Now you have the choice of reading it, watching me read it on YouTube, or listening to me on SoundCloud, Stitcher Radio, iTunes, or iVooc. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, tea, a glass of wine or beer, and prepare yourself to be as impressed as I am at Raman's insightful, contextual, compare and contrast look at the world. There's a picture of the cover of the book, China is Communist, Damn It, and the caption says, Raman Mazaheri juxtaposes book number 3 of the China trilogy, China is Communist, Damn It, Dawn of the Red Dynasty, with John K. Fairbanks's mainstream classic, China, A New History. And here's Raman. Part 4 will take a very different tack. There is a great and hilarious story about Mao during the Cultural Revolution, which is relayed in the Western University standard textbook, China, A New History, by the West Doyen on China, John King Fairbank. In late 1965, the rumblings of the Cultural Revolution had begun due to grumblings over corruption, revisionism, which means taking the capitalist road, selling out socialism, etc., and the snooty technocratism of urbanites. The party led by Mao saw these trends as threats to the common good, the revolution, and the party's heavenly mandate, the millennia-old concept that China's rulers are chosen by heaven to rule and that they must actually display this divinity by perfectly moral conduct and leadership, or else revolt is justified. Mao, being the great progressive leader he was against these anti-socialist trends, but there was only so much he could do about it on his own. Mao had launched no less than 7 anti-corruption campaigns since 1949, but to no avail. The problem was deeply embedded and beyond the reach of one man, even if one assumes Mao to be the totalitarian Mao the Terrible the West portrays him as. With decades of anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist fighting clearly under threat from domestic reactionaries, in 1966, Mao supervised the party's May 16 directive to state the threat clearly. They will seize political power and turn the dictatorship of the proletariat into a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Decoded, the corrupt pro-capitalists will turn China into a Western European bourgeois democracy. And from a foreign policy perspective in 1966, a crisis was undoubtedly at China's doorstep. The U.S. was massively invading Vietnam, and the largest communist party in the world, not in power, was being the victim of a literal genocide in Indonesia with U.S. support. Why is genocide only for ethnic racial groups and not ideological groups? Other than making political statements to a party which contained many cadres who were only concerned about increasing their profits, he had only one other recourse: popular opinion. That was all preamble. This brings me to that great and hilarious story. And the subtitle reads, "Crossing the Great River. To seize the moment, you have to first understand the meaning." And here's the retelling of Fairbanks, his interpretation from his book. And I quote, "In the second phase of the Cultural Revolution, from August 1966 to January 1967, Chairman Mao was a great showman. The dutiful Liu Shaoqi, already doomed for destruction," and I'll spell that for you listeners and watchers. Liu is his family name, and Shaoqi, Shaoqi, is his first name, if you would like to follow up with some research. The dutiful Liu Shaoqi, already doomed for destruction, was orchestrating the anti-revisionist movement among the party faithful. In July 1966, the Chinese public was electrified to learn that Mao had come north, pausing on the way to swim across the Yangtze. Since rural Chinese generally could not swim and few adventurers had ever tried the Yangtze, this was like the news that Queen Elizabeth II had swum the Channel. He was obviously a paragon of athleticism, is that right? Athleticism, I guess, yeah. Capable of superhuman feats. Photos showing his head on top of the water suggest Mao did not use a crawl, side stroke, backstroke, or breaststroke, but swam in his own fashion, standing upright, in, not on the water. He was clocked at an unusually fast speed. And that's the end of John Fairbanks's outtake. And there is a photo. A close-up photo of Mao Zedong swimming across the mighty Yangtze River. He is the gentleman at the bottom of the picture, with 3 of the 5,000 citizens who joined him. And now back to Raman's comment about John Fairbanks's book. Hilarious! And written with maximum effort for humor, too. What the heck was Mao doing? Those inscrutable Chinese will never figure them out. Mao was just being Mao, a capricious tyrant. But that one takes the cake. Elizabeth II swimming the channel, laugh out loud, good show. It's too bad that Fairbanks, one of the key American shapers of thought on China for decades, had no idea why such a move electrified China. Fairbanks implies that Mao's demonstration was pure self-aggrandizement in the most Western individualist election campaigning of fashions. I am so superhuman that I can crush all dissent. Just watch me doggy paddle over the Yangtze. That makes no sense at all. Time and again, Mao's swim is reported by Westerners as being loaded with symbolism for the Chinese people, but I have never seen the symbolism actually explained. That's too bad, because what this story does prove is just how close Mao was with the public and how he spoke their language, why the public adored him, still do and always will, and why he was such a people-trusting, people-liberating Democrat. Subtitle: Beyond Political Theater and into the Realm of Political Religiosity. Boy, ramen's really got me into some tongue twisters today. Religiosity. This was the meaning Fairbanks missed, and which many of the people of China did not. The ethical book of the Chinese is the I Ching, spelled I, the capital I, and then C-H-I-N-G, otherwise translated as the Book of Change, which is the world's oldest book for a reason. It can be foolishly used as a divination tool, to divine the future, just as opening the Quran to a random page is used to give advice to some Muslims. But the I Ching is truly a master guidebook of human and heaven-based morality. Briefly, the I Ching examines 64 ethical, personal, and social concepts, conditions, and states. One meditates at length on a range of concepts: mutual influence, bringing together, darkness, proceeding humbly, not yet fulfilled, etc. And the book discusses their true meaning, how they progress in stages, and how they interrelate with other concepts. Indeed, the interrelatedness of this very first ever binary system reaches a sort of social string theory level of unity, and with social morality and divine guidance omnipresent, though not Abrahamic, of course, as in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. By studying the I Ching, one can see how, when, and why these 64 ethical concepts / opportunities are appropriate or not, and also get instruction on how they are likely to change being the only constant in this mortal world. In this book, it is occasionally a phrase, quote, favorable to cross great rivers, end of quote. When the I Ching reads that it is, quote, favorable to cross great rivers, end of quote, that means it is the right time to dare the greatest of undertakings. Indeed, this sentence reflects the maximum amount of good and luck possible. It's the best possible news and means heaven above could not look upon you or your plans more favorably. I Ching judgments can be negative, neutral, slightly favorable, etc. If it reads not favorable to cross great rivers, it means stop what you're doing and don't try it. But nothing is better than favorable to cross great rivers. It means take courage. Heaven smiles upon you. You are just. You are in tune with ethics, in tune with the Tao or the Tao, a Chinese concept very similar to the Holy Spirit, humanity and nature, etc. So, for Mao to literally cross the Great River in July 1966 was to emphatically, physically tell all the Chinese people, quote, join me in daring this great undertaking of the Cultural Revolution. Cross the great river now in real life. When one is thus able to look at Mao's swim through the eyes of a Chinese person and can fully understand the cultural context as well as the historical/political context, then we finally see how it could have electrified China. For the Chinese, it is truly as if he had reenacted a scene from the Bible. The only way I could compare it is for Iranians to thusly see, in order to defend Iran's sovereign right to a nuclear energy program, Supreme Leader Khamenei travels to Karbala, Iraq, and has a boxing match with Mike Tyson. If you don't understand this, please don't pretend to tell me that you know Iran, our religion, and our culture. I'm sure Iranians are smirking, not because of Khamenei's advanced age and the absurdity of such a fight, but because they know exactly what I mean. This would be a reenactment of the glorious and assured annihilation, thus the martyrdom of Imam Ali, which inspires all Shia, spelled S-H-I-A, as opposed to Sunni, S-U-N-N-I, as much as the suffering of Jesus does for Christians. In parentheses, even more in 2018, I would say, as the annual multi-million pilgrimage to Karbala shows, and which Western media certainly does not want to show. End of parentheses. To explain it to the French, I love Raman's contextualization, in order to demand the reversal of Brexit, neoliberal Macron, the president of France, goes to Rouen and fields media questions as he's tied to a stake. And of course, this is, if you don't know, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in Rouen in Normandy. In fact, I've been there. My wife and I lived there for 5 years. So he assumes you know that Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in Rouen. And fields media questions as he's tied to a stake. For the Americans, acquiescing to Russophobia, Trump invites Putin over for diplomatic talks, but then personally captains a ship across the Potomac to surprisingly capture the Russian leader like George Washington. Did Mao know what he was doing? As the son of a rich farmer, he went to school where he was undoubtedly instructed in the Chinese classics, as education centered around them, which is true. Mao also knew that other educated people were similarly instructed in the I Ching. The only question which I cannot definitely answer, as I have never been embedded in Chinese popular culture, is how likely is it that the average person has been familiar with the sayings of the Chinese classics in the I Ching. I'm going to write about this in more detail as a follow-up to the first 4 installments of Raman's amazing 8-part series, but it is true. I mean, the Chinese, even if they're illiterate, have heard comments from the Tao and from the I Ching all their lives. I think we can say with confidence, at least somewhat familiar. No? Grow up in the West and you will be familiar with biblical sayings, even if you aren't Christian. It is universally reported that the swim somehow galvanized the nation, and I doubt it was the view of an old man doing the doggy paddle. And a perpetual question of semiotics. Why this and not that? I.e., why not climb a mountain to electrify the people, or chop down a cherry tree, or save a lamb? You certainly can't argue with the results. We can only try to explain them. And yet Fairbank, the China scholar best known to the U.S. and academia alike, clearly had no idea what Mao was doing, what it represented, and why it was inspirational. Fairbank clearly had not read the I Ching, perhaps the single most important foundation of Chinese culture, despite being Harvard University's first ever China scholar. This is a recipe for terrible scholarship, terrible teaching, and ignorant but arrogant students. It is a scholarship which is typical of the West and which was debunked so superbly by Edward Said, Edward, as you may know, and then Said, S-A-I-D, Edward Said's Orientalism. It is scholars who don't go to foreign lands to learn and respect the local culture. They go there to proselytize their own ideas and to return stories which confirm the standard stereotypes, almost as if they had never been there at all. Just as those who used to be called Oriental scholars never read the Quran, I highly doubt that Fairbanks's knowledge of China extended beyond the superficial and beyond what was useful for him as an American. So there is little wonder to one who understands the cultural significance how China did not erupt in delirious, sweet, modern, and violent revolution against reactionary forces shortly after the swim. The swim was Mao's obviously successful attempt to get the people inspired and to reassure the people that some of their leadership was on their side and on the side of preserving the popular revolution the nation worked so hard to install. There are other facts and anecdotes of history to relate to defend Mao, but I chose this one because it illustrates how Fairbank and the Westerners who have studied for China and have given us our wisdom of Mao's alleged tyranny actually have very little comprehension of the Chinese soul. Their scholarship exists to defend their own ideas, not to understand the amazing qualities of other cultures, and are genuine only in their reactionary anti-socialism. And yet, these are the people who inform today's students, journalists, and citizenry in the West. But new scholars, such as Jeff J. Brown, and his superb factual account of Chinese history since 1949, China is communist, damn it, wades unapologetically into the tidal wave of Western disapproval to deliver a history which is actually sympathetic to Chinese people. I could have continued giving more and more facts and statistics to prove that Mao's tenure greatly benefited the average person. How long do you have? Because there are many. Thankfully, unlike when I was growing up, they are now actually available on the internet for all to find. Instead of using statistics, I thought this anecdote showed just how pathetically lost, how uninterested, how much lack of soul the people informing the West on China really have had. Unlike Brown, establishment scholars on China are not trying at all to learn from, to understand, or to defend the Chinese people. They are trying to conquer it culturally. If that fails, then to conquer it militarily. To prove my objectivity, a Chinese person is better qualified to verify the relationship between Mao's swim and the I Ching, but what if they haven't read the Chinese classics? I have talked to 2 handfuls of Chinese people I know, and none have read them. All are under 40 years old, and therefore they are not qualified to make this verification. This hypothesis thus remains for the Chinese to verify. But I say the circumstantial evidence is weighty. Just because I have not seen this hypothesis elsewhere, that only confirms that very few people have read the Chinese classics and analyzed them in the political sense and written about that in a Western language. Fairbank did not do this, even though it was his charge to do exactly that. Hopefully some Chinese political scholar can confirm my theory. But how many of them read English? Such is the slow pace of cultural globalization / awareness, but the internet is speeding things up, as this article shows. Then there's a picture of China Rising, communist, I forgot the title of my book, Capitalist Roads, Socialist Destinations. Book number 2 of the must-read China trilogy, China Rising, Capitalist Roads, Socialist Destinations. Well, it was right there in the caption. Subtitle, Rehabilitating Mao is Unlikely. There is no will to change in the West. John Lennon had it right. If you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. Why? Because few people in the 1960s in the West were truly political, excepting African Americans. Obviously, nearly none were dedicated revolutionaries because the West had zero revolutions. They looked to minstrels like the Beatles to lead a revolution, but their famous song, Revolution, is clearly designed to appropriate the word from the political sphere. The lyrics are not just apolitical, but 100% anti-politics. Many in the 1960s sure postured like revolutionaries, though. My impression is that their main goal was to make it with the opposite sex, and that is really not something revolutionary in human history. The irony is that if Lenin understood Mao, if Lenin had grasped the goal of the Cultural Revolution, which I related in my previous article of this series, he would have seen that Mao's 1960s anti-establishment, anti-corrupt, middle-aged old people view, his slogans like, "It is right to rebel," that's what Mao actually said, was incredibly rock and roll. Politically, the fault is not with Mao, but with Lenin. Lenin is a typical Western political and spiritual nihilist, after all. In his song, God, Lenin says he believes in nothing, including the I Ching, even listing it before the Bible. He also doesn't believe in people, ideas, or methods. He only believes in himself, singing, "I believe in me, Yoko and me, and that's reality." So Lenin believed in individualism and his romantic love. That's nice for him. Lenin concludes by opining that, quote, "the dream is over," end of quote, and that he, quote, was the dream weaver, end of quote. The literal meaning for Lenin, the 1960s icon, seems clear, or perhaps he was giving us a Hindu-inspired life is a dream idea. Lenin finishes by saying that in 1970, quote, "you just have to carry on. The dream is over," end of quote. This reminds us today of the slogan, "keep calm and carry on," end of quote, which swept England during the 2009 financial crisis, a paean to their willfully blind conservatism, which will not countenance even the idea of discussing the idea of changing the status quo, regardless of any crisis. What's sure is that culturally, Lenin led the way for the West, and in 1970 he presaged their descent into total individualism and nihilism instead of maintaining his own cultural revolution. So when it comes to Lenin and Mao, whom is the man of the people, the social revolutionary, and the ethicist, and whom is merely another self-centered ego freak? Whom is the man of social change, and whom is the status quo man urging everyone not to even bother trying? The answer is clear, and it is certainly the opposite of the West's mainstream belief. Indeed, who would have thought that drug-using minstrels would ultimately get bored by worldly, wonkish societal issues? Maybe the West can next turn to a heroin-using jazz drummer for advice on urban planning models. If you want to hear some raw guitar and a great singing voice, one may turn to Lenin. But the incredible thing is that Westerners turn to him for political guidance. Subtitle: should we defend Mao? No, it will make us look uncool, and the John Lennons of the world will call us squares. The bad news is you are certainly a square if you have read this far. Seriously, yes, we should, mainly to humbly acknowledge the superior judgment of the Chinese people. The Chinese people defend Mao, and that should be enough for leftists worldwide. It is arrogance which refuses to defer to the judgment of locals, because unless you deeply know their culture, language, history, have lived there extensively, etc., it is pure arrogance to pass judgment on their key cultural matters. That is why I openly admitted the limitations of my interpretations of Chinese popular culture regarding my, quote, Mao swim and I Ching hypothesis. Popular approval is a nearly infallible judge, no? Castro, Khomeini, Ho Chi Minh, Sankara, Sankara, Mao, all are universally loved in their home countries. Pol Pot, P-O-L-P-O-T, for example, is a leftist leader who is not revered by Cambodians, so it's not as if all leftists are loved. In parentheses, Pol Pot was a rabid xenophobe and thus not a true leftist. End of parentheses. Libya is also a bit split on the legacy of Gaddafi, who certainly must appear better in retrospect. Therefore, we must defend Mao because we must defend the judgment of the Chinese people. To do otherwise is to claim that more than 1 billion people are incapable of thinking clearly. If 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong, how can 1 billion Mao fans not be? I think that Fairbank, even if he actually did talk to average Chinese people about Mao, was never willing to honestly report their opinion. Brown, however, has talked to thousands of Chinese people over his decades living there. He says that while they criticize aspects of the Communist Party, quote, I wrote, but through it all, I can safely say that about 98% of the Chinese I've talked to like Mao and what he did for China. His image adorns taxicabs like an amulet of St. Christopher to ward off accidents. He is on walls of privately owned offices, businesses, restaurants. These are private, not government. They are citizens who have decided to show their admiration for the man on their own. He's everywhere. How can this be in the face of relentless demonization by Western media, educators, historians, and politicians? End of quote from my book, China is Communistan. People will say, it's because the Chinese government blocks the truth about Mao. Oh, if only they could hear our pure Western voices. Such a response, again, inaccurately and arrogantly implies that the West knows Chinese history and culture better than the Chinese themselves. The government has openly stated that Mao was 70% right and 30% wrong, so it's not as if there is an all-dominating state-sponsored cult of personality. Beyond respecting obviously better informed local opinion, a point which most treat as secondary, I almost refuse to have the, quote, Mao was evil, end of quote, conversation for more than 15 seconds. I give 15 seconds because I was raised to be polite. Point number 1, to equivocate Mao with Hitler is to equivocate two people who fought against each other. It's inherently absurd. Point number 2, to claim Mao was as bad as Japanese fascists or American capitalists is also to equivocate groups with sharply different belief systems and goals. Point number 3, to claim Mao is worse or as bad as American, French, and English leaders who terminated millions while Mao tried to defend those millions from these foreign invasions is absurd. End of Raman's three-point argument when people talk about how Mao is evil. In 1978, 2 years after Mao died, China's Gini coefficient, G-I-N-I, coefficient, the most commonly used measurement of inequality, was a sparkling 0.16. The lowest score is currently 0.25 in Finland. It's fair to say that Mao's single most important goal was to create an equal society. He succeeded better than almost anyone ever. So I'm done with that one, and quickly. Then there's a picture of the 44 Days book cover, and the caption reads, "The indispensable book number 1 of the expansive China trilogy entitled 44 Days Backpacking in China, the Middle Kingdom in the 21st Century, with the United States, Europe, and the Fate of the World in its looking glass. Subtitle: Mighty Mao was never the West to take away, and he'll never leave. The West's discussion of Mao, along with the Great Leap Forward's famine and the Cultural Revolution, is based on ignorance, arrogance, and the political nihilism of failed revolutionaries, in quotations, and hardened reactionaries. To repeat, for hard statistics about the socioeconomic improvement for the average Chinese person during Mao's stewardship, and not just since Deng's reforms, you can buy Brown's book. Brown explains how Mao overcame a blockade worse than Iran's to produce massive growth with equality. Mao clearly had his cake and ate it too, and with his fellow citizens. But as cynical John Lennon shows, it was always difficult for the West to grasp the moral and ethical, nation-inspiring, and nation-building revolution Mao personified. They took two very different paths. What is so typically Western is that they insist on pulling China onto their toll road instead of being content to live and let live in mutual peace. John Lennon famously said that Elvis died when he joined the army. But that's not true. Elvis died when he joined Hollywood after his discharge and was no longer a great musician, but just another phony actor. When did John Lennon die as a revolutionary? I can't say for sure, but his dismissal of Mao is a good place to start. No one is going to say John Lennon did not succeed wildly in his chosen field, but how long can the judgment of Fairbank and other top Western scholars endure when we can so easily prove how they did not respect or understand Chinese culture? Even though it is fundamental for understanding China, nobody cares about Confucianism in the West. All you will hear about is its yin, yin, feminine, passive counterpart, Daoism. Plenty of Daoism books in the local Western bookstore, for sure. How many on Confucianism? I guess yang, masculine, creative, dynamic, propagating. Confucianism doesn't go well with acid trips or high-intensity pharmaceutical drugs. I'm not surprised that the Communist Party is back to promoting Confucianism. The I Ching is not banned in China, and I'm not surprised they prefer it over Daoism, which says, "Cross the great river." What for? What river? Is this thing on? Raman's also very funny. And he puts in parentheses, "Clearly I'm even a worse scholar of Daoism than I am Confucianism." I'm not amazed that the Western media views Mao as 100% wrong. The West has been an imperialist, extremist, racist culture for 500 years, and a rabidly anti-socialist one for 100 years. But I am surprised that Western leftists don't defend Mao even 30%. Their main problem is they have not bought books like Brown's, because books like Brown's simply did not exist until very, very recently. Prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, a book like Brown's would have gotten you jailed in the West or worse. The internet is changing this, and that cannot be stopped, only slowed. Kudos to Brown, and external kudos to Mao for being as right and as brave as any of the top politicians of the 20th century. And no apologies if my picture of Chairman Mao ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. I know it's going to be all right, for China at least. That's the end of Raman's part 4. This is and then there's a footnote. This is the 4th article in an 8-part series which compares old versus new Western scholarship on China. Here is the list of articles slated to be published, and I hope you will find them useful in your leftist struggle. I'm not going to read them out. Raman Mazaheri is a senior correspondent and contributing editor dispatched from Paris for the Greenville Post. Mazaheri is the chief correspondent in Paris for Press TV and has lived in France since 2009. He has been a daily newspaper reporter in the U.S. and has reported from Iran, Cuba, Egypt, Tunisia, South Korea, and elsewhere. His work has appeared in various journals, magazines, and websites, as well as on radio and television. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed this. Ramen's amazing. I mean, I'm so impressed with his series. I'm going to actually write sort of a intermission, a halftime article to respond to the first four. And he also actually emailed me and asked me some questions. He said, you know, I've been thinking about, and he asked me a few more questions and I will answer those in an article before going on to number 5. Again, friends, fans, and followers, please share regularly and widely this website, channel, etc. There is so much disinformation out there about China, and the world would be a lot better place if more and more people understood this amazing country and its people. Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland, signing out from Shenzhen. Have a wonderful Bastille Day. Enjoy the England-Belgium third, fourth place match tonight, and France and Croatia tomorrow night for the World Cup. Allez les Bleus! Go France! Bye-bye.